emotional, bossy, gossipy, bitchy, selfish, opportunistic, temperamental, indecisive. These are just some of the words used to describe women in performance reviews. These are not the same words used to describe men. When we think about this and we think about everything that we have to do as women, how many of us in this room feel like we can't win? If we're too... that was earlier than I expected. If we're too soft, we get judged. If we're too hard, we get judged. If we're secretive, we get judged. If we're too vocal, we get judged. There's this road that we're supposed to be following, some journey that we're on, and none of us seem to know the route. Do you feel that way? So we have to look at this impossible roadmap and figure out, how do we find our course? And the reality is, so many of us have had this roadmap drawn out for us from the time we were children, and then it carried on while we were in school, and then we moved into post-secondary, and it did the same thing, and then we move into our career, and the same thing happens again, where we don't know what the road is when it comes to our communication. We don't exactly know how we're supposed to communicate because the message is so unclear. So what I want us to do today is I want us to take ownership over our own communication styles. I want us to take ownership over the fact that we have complete control over it. And I want us to be open to the idea that maybe there is a different way we can do it. Maybe we all know we're not perfect. So how can we use some new skills to potentially take our communication to a different level so that roadmap becomes a little bit clearer? Our goal in all of this is what I'm going to refer to as authentic assertiveness. You in? Okay. So the question to ask ourselves is, how did we get here? How did we get to the point in time where we don't know what the right way to communicate is? And what's happened is we communicate in one way, and then something happens that reinforces that behavior. So if we communicate in one way and we get a good response, we're going to keep doing that. We communicate in one way and we get a negative response, we're probably going to avoid doing that. It's just basic principle. And so we start to learn these lessons. We start to have our communication styles shaped. There's skills that we get, there's things that we do where it just all starts to be shaped for us, and we don't really know where it comes from. But if we actually step back and think about it, so many of us probably really know some of the things that have shaped the way we now communicate. My first memory of my father was a night when I was 3 years old. And I remember listening to my mom and my dad fighting. I woke up to them fighting. And then there was this really loud crash. And then at some point I went back to sleep. And the next morning when I woke up, my dad was gone. And on our countertop was, if any of you remember, your grandparents probably had one too, one of those really thick cutting boards. It was like 2.5 inches thick, and the old wooden ones. And it was broken in half. And I realized that was what the crash was. I don't know what my dad did to break it in half, but he did something. And what I learned really early on is that I didn't want to be around people who yelled. And that one situation sort of started that for me and then reinforced it, because yelling meant bad things. Fast forward 5 years later, my mom gets diagnosed with cancer in January of '87. She was hospitalized in March, and she died in September. So we then moved back in with my father, who we pretty much hadn't seen for 5 years. He's an alcoholic, he's abusive, and he's mean. And so now all of a sudden we've gone from this one household into this new household, and he's doing bad things, mainly to my sister and my stepmom. For whatever reason, I was not the one who got hurt. He didn't touch me. I often say it's because the one quality I got from him was the fact that I'm a bit of a loudmouth. And so I stood up to him. And so what happened in those circumstances, what happened when he would start to abuse them, is I would call the police. I would be the one who went to the phone, called 911, and tried to get the police to come. The police would come, and then they would leave. Why? Because my father was a police officer. And so you protect your brothers, and they would go. And so in that situation, I learned, number one, how to fight and stand up for people. I learned how critical it was for people to be heard. But I also learned how to compartmentalize. Anybody who's grown up in a world of abuse knows how to turn it on and turn it off. And that's what I did. My friends loved my father. Everybody loved him. He was this amazing man as far as everybody was concerned, because in the picture to everybody, that's what he was. So I left the house and my life was perfect. What that turns into as an adult, what that turns into in a work world, is that the whole leave it at the door concept, I'm an expert at. Because I can turn it off and turn it on in a heartbeat. I can be having like a completely, my staff are here, they'll reinforce this, that I can be having this complete like stern conversation and be like, hi, how are you today? You good, okay. Okay, so, and like I can flip on a dime, but it's because of that. It's because of what happened. And if it wasn't the police leaving, it was him pulling a phone out of a wall before I could dial. But it was important to me to still fight for my sister and to still fight for my stepmom. And so when we start to look at these situations and start to look at, these are the things that start to shape how we communicate. And they shaped me as a leader. When I first started to lead, my goal was to bring the life that I was looking for, that peace and happiness, that calm, to myself, to my team as a leader. I protected them from everything. I went down for them. If there was something going wrong, I like threw myself on them so that my boss hit me and didn't touch them. Like I did anything to protect my team. But what that turned into for me, it didn't work. We all know we can't do it for them. They have to do it themselves. And so those lessons that I'd learned early on, I realized I had to tweak, I had to change, I had to come up with, what does that look like now? And that was the change that I started to evolve through. That was what I was trying to fix. And so I had this thing in my head that happiness is something that I'm super passionate about. And I've always had this goal to help people be happier. I've had it since I was a teenager. Like it's just naturally ingrained in me. And so at work, I was like, well, I want to help my team be happier. And so I would reinforce the thoughts by actions that would happen. I would be nice to them, they would not quit. Great, reinforced thought. I would potentially be stern to one person and that would be the time that they would quit. Well, we can't be stern. And we have this ability to have things happen and we reinforce them. The brain has a really unique ability to help us see the things we think we want to see. So I really want us to look at the fact that how do we evolve and how do we change? And for me, I realized that if I was going to continue to grow as a leader, I couldn't continue to lead that way. It wasn't a great long-term plan. So I had to evolve. I had to change how I led. And so a huge piece of that was to work on my own personal assertiveness. So this is an assertiveness spectrum that I've created. It's nothing fancy. I've just put assertiveness traits on a line. It's trademarked and everything. No. Do what you want with it. It's totally fine. So this is the assertiveness spectrum. So if we look at assertive in the center, this is obviously where we're aiming to be. We want to aim to be at that assertive line. And when we're thinking about what does assertiveness mean means I win, you win. Great thing about assertiveness is everybody wins, okay? What does that look like? It looks like, or what's it sound like? It sounds like clear direction. Sounds like short sentences that are clear and understood. It sounds like a lot of questions to understand somebody else's point of view. It sounds like listening for potential opinions on things. No assumptions, no blaming, right? It's a positive conversation. If we shift to the right and move towards aggressive, is that your right too? Yeah. I'm a fitness instructor, we use opposites. When you shift to the right and we move to aggressive, when we think about what does aggressive communication look like, aggressive communication is me trying to win and you losing. That's what we're looking at in aggressive communication. Somebody is trying to win. It involves a lot of I statements because it's about me winning. I'm going to talk about what I want a lot more. I'm going to make a lot more assumptions on how you do things. I'm going to blame you for a lot more things. That's where that aggressive side of things comes out. Okay? We shift even farther across and we get to abrasive. The difference between that aggressive and the abrasive, I refer to as respect. So aggressive is a really strong assertion trying to get what I want. Abrasive involves disrespect, name calling. I don't want to go as far as swearing, but it could, right? It's more harsh, it's more hurtful, it's more intentional, right? Where aggressive, yes, I'm trying to get what I want, so I'm pushing at it, but it's still done with a level of respect. If we flip to the other side of the spectrum, so if you think about non-assertive behavior would be when we're using unclear sentences. We're not saying things, we're using words like, maybe you could do this for me, right? So it's not really clear what we're asking of people. We're softening it up. We're disregarding our own feelings. That's a time where we start to put our own feelings to the side. In that non-assertive side of things, nobody wins because I don't actually get what I want because I'm not saying it. You don't actually get what you want because I'm not even asking you for it. So no one wins. If we slide down the scale to passive-aggressive, in a passive-aggressive situation, we have to remember this is still aggressive, which means my goal is I win, you lose. It's still aggressive behavior. It just looks different because it looks like I don't care if I win. It sounds like I don't care if I win, but it's actually emotionally dishonest. It sounds like it's not self-fulfilling, but the ultimate goal is that it's self-fulfilling. This is usually where gossip stems from because the goal is I'm trying to get back at you. So if we recognize that this is where gossip comes from, which is truly the most toxic thing we could have in the workplace, we're looking at we have to acknowledge the fact that passive-aggressive behavior is aggressive. It's still about me winning. We flip to the far end of the scale, we have silence. In that silence side of things, this is where I'm just like, yes, whatever you'd like, yes. And I don't acknowledge my own feelings. I don't acknowledge what I want. I don't do any of those things. I just agree. We move through it. So what I want you to do, we're going to do a little activity. I think they turned the heat on too. I feel like we're all warming up now. We're going to get a little toasty now. So we're going to do an activity. You're going to work with your whole table, okay? And here's what I want you to do. You're going to have about 5 minutes-ish. I want you to identify a leader who you have worked with who fits into each of these categories. So ideally, yeah, if you're here with your bosses, they're wonderful. They sit right here. They do everything perfect. Definitely perfection. So we're going to think of somebody who fits in every line on the scale. Between your table, we should have an example of every single one. So I want you, first off, to come up with who that person is. And then I want you to talk about why would you put that person there? What things did they do? What actions and behaviors did they do that you would then classify them as that? And then the other thing I want you to reflect on is how often were they there? Was this a consistent behavior for them? Was this just a sometimes thing? Where would you put them? So who, how often there, and why? So we're going to do a little non-scientific experiment here. I have no idea where this is going to go. We're just going to see. So everybody came up with their leaders on the scale? Okay. If we're looking at aggressive and abrasive, who in the room, when you talked about somebody who was aggressive and abrasive, thought of a man? Okay. So we're going to call that 50%-ish. Okay. We're going to go 50%. Who, when you thought of silence and passive aggressive, thought of a woman? Okay, so we're about 50-50. And assertive, man? Woman? Ah, good job, ladies. So, and I only ask that because I truly, you never know which way it's going to go. But I do think it's something interesting to look at, right? Is there sort of a place where the leaders that stand out as leaders in our mind, is there a place where they sit on that scale? Now, on the flip side, who had an abrasive or an aggressive leader? Who is somebody who they actually, did somebody have one that was actually a positive in their life, like somebody who they really respected? Yeah. And I ask that because I do think there are, especially like in my world where I work with a lot of athletes, a lot of them have had coaches that are quite abrasive and aggressive, right? And so, but they would throw themselves in front of a train for them. So I do think it's something to look at. Again, when we're talking about, we don't want to judge things. I'm not saying it would be my recommendation of a leadership style, but I do think in some circumstances, people do respect that and look up to that. For you guys who had your hands up, was it a coach situation? Sorry? But you liked working for them? Cool. So what I'm going to talk about now is I'm going to talk about the Happy Leader method. So this is the method that I teach through Happy Leader Enterprises, and the concept behind it is pretty straightforward. So a lot of you have seen me speak before, and I talk, the Be Your Best Self side of things is the talk that I tend to do a fair amount, and that's the energize, prioritize, and optimize side of things. So the whole concept behind that, and sort of where this is the first step in the model, is around the fact that if we are going to lead others, we have to have the time and energy to give to them, right? If we don't have enough time and we don't have enough energy, we're probably not giving other people our best. Once we do that, then that puts us in a position to build great relationships, which is consistency, transparency, and follow through. That's what we're going to talk about today. From there, we move to helping others live happy. Once we have built relationships with people, that puts us in a position to help them achieve their goals, their values, and get results. If people who work for you are getting goals, values, and results, the likelihood is they're not going to quit. So therefore, they're going to have engagement and succession, and you're going to get people who have fulfillment, satisfaction, and growth, and they stay with your organization for a long period of time. So we are going to focus on the build relationship side of things, because I think we would all agree with great relationships comes the opportunity to have great feedback. Yes? With great relationships comes the opportunity to have great communication. Yep. Right? With great communication, let me try that again. With great relationships, do we have the opportunity, do we trust more? Right? So that's why we're looking to build along that great relationship side of things. So when we look at the first step, it's consistency. So moms in the room, who are my moms? People moms. Just for you, Chelsea. No problem. Dog moms? You can be both. You can be both. Okay. Do I have any cat moms? Okay, so I'm not picking on the cat moms, but we're not working with the cats because they're passive aggressive. And we're not going to solve them because they will just blatantly be like, they don't care. So dogs want to please you. Chill. Everyone's like, yes, the cat moms are like, no, they're good too. I feel like we're back in disc and we're judging each other. So if we think about, the reason why I bring up the mom side of things is because when we think about consistency, we can relate to it. Whether we are people, human moms or dog moms, right? We have to have consistent behavior in order to teach them things, in order for them to know what to expect. So what I want you to reflect on is Jen talked about self-awareness. We talked a lot about stuff this morning, and even Courtney with her branding stuff. If we go back and look at that spectrum, I want you to reflect on where on the spectrum do you sit? And I'm going to put a caveat to that. Where on the spectrum do you sit at work? Okay, so we're going to work from a work perspective. And I want you to think about it. You're not going to sit in one place all the time. That's the reality. We're not going to sit in one place all the time. I don't want you to judge it. I just want you to be honest with yourself. There's no point in doing activities like this if we don't take true self-reflection. And so if I were to look at myself, how I would score myself is about 90% of the time I sit in that assertiveness spot. Now I'm going to asterisk myself on this one. I worked my ass off to get there. It is not where I naturally sit. Okay, so if we go back, my natural place to sit is trying to be the pleaser who makes people happy and all of those things. Had to come up with a new way to do that. So now I worked really hard and I can sit there. But about 3% of the time, I would say, I still go silent. I still hit that point because that's a part of me that's like, ooh, what if they don't listen to me? Still sits inside of me. So that happens sometimes. And then I would say probably about 7% of the time, I can be aggressive. Usually because I actually haven't done a good job building relationships with people, and I'm frustrated because I can't get them to do something that I need them to do. And so I shift to aggressive where I just tell, right? People are laughing because you know it's how it works. So we've got to take a look at that and go, okay, and that to me is my own problem. Like that's a me issue. So I want you, no judgments, there's no right and wrong. You're not even going to tell anybody where you sit. But I want you to spend a couple minutes reflecting on how you would break down your own communication style on that scale. You could have all 5 spots on the scale. That's totally fine. What would your personal percentages be on that scale? So take a couple minutes, break that down. There is paper on your tables too if you need it. So my question to you is, how many people rated themselves 80% or higher in one area? I don't care what area, just in one area, 80% or higher. Okay, pretty good. So, and I ask that if we go back to the mom question. So thinking about it, if you guys think about your kids, if I'm in a grocery store and my kids ask me for something, and 80% of the time, I say, no, you can't have something, you can't have a chocolate bar, right? 80% of the time, the likelihood, they know, they've got some odds, but it's not that good, right? But if 40% of the time, I say no, they got some pretty good odds, so they're gonna give her a go. They're gonna throw it down and see what they can get, right? Who's got toddlers? So, yeah. So we've got to think about this. So our employees are kind of like our children, right? In the sense that the more consistent we are, the more they know what to expect. And I talk about consistency actually, even if it's on what we would consider a negative side of the spectrum, if you're consistently there, I actually believe people will work for you and stay working for you because they know what to expect. So I had a manager who worked for me for a number of years, and she was sharp-tongued, she was truly, she was pretty rude. She could be abrasive. She was not a nice person, like 100% of the time. Like, she was not good. However, her team had no issues working for her. Because it was consistent, they knew what to expect from her. They didn't personalize it. They didn't think it was a them issue, because she was like that with everybody all the time. And so, somebody's envisioning somebody in particular. Yeah, no surprises. And people don't like surprises. They like to know what to expect. So as long as it's consistent, people like that. So what happened with this manager was I was trying to work on this with her, because I was like, maybe we could be better. And so she tried to emulate me. It was totally an overcorrect. So instead of just, not calling people names, she went to, woo! And I'm like, whoa, okay, we're gonna give this a go. And what it turned into was she couldn't do it consistently, and it seemed so fake because it was so not authentic. And so because it then became an inconsistent behavior, then people started to personalize it. Then they started to say, she acted to me like this, but not to her, so it must be a me issue. And that's the challenge. So, and I say this because truly being consistent is actually more valuable than being inconsistent. And because people just want to know what to expect. Obviously, the goal would be consistently assertive, right? That's where we want to get to. But if people know what to expect, they're okay with it. So what I want you to do for 90 seconds, you're going to work in partners, 45 seconds each. Fast feedback, okay? 45 seconds. We got a bunch of smart women in this room, so we're going to take advantage of it. And we are going to take 45 seconds where you know you are the most consistent and why you're the most consistent there. So you're going to share back and forth. Here's where I'm most consistent. Here's why I am. Here's how I do it. And then we're going to switch. 45 seconds. And if you want to be really enthusiastic, stand up and do it, because then you get some energy going. Okay? 45 seconds each. Go! So we're going to move on to transparency. And so with transparency, when I think about how would I define transparency, to me it's about honesty, it's about clarity, it's about being able to really have any level of conversation. That to me is transparency. And so when I first started managing, when I first started leading, so my career's been in the fitness industry, and when I first started leading, the majority of people who worked in management positions in the fitness industry were men. And so there was this sort of vision as to how everybody who I saw around me led, and it didn't work for me. And I got really confused. So I figured out a way that I'm going to show a video and you're going to hear it. Because this is truly what I feel like the people who I looked up to did. Okay, so I'm not totally exaggerating that is what leaders looked like around me 20 years ago. And I think truly for a lot of us who've been in business for 20 years, is that not what leadership looked like 20 years ago? There was a lot of yelling and abrasiveness and that whole side of things. And it definitely was in the fitness industry. Again, the majority of people who ended up in the fitness industry 20 years ago were ex-athletes. So that's what their coaches did, and that's how they thought you led. You yelled at people, you beat it out of them. And so Chelsea can talk about her ex-manager. And so she's demonstrating him throwing things. And so that was what happened. And for me, I just knew I couldn't do it. I tried, but it was so not authentic for me, and it so went against that core value of not wanting to be around yelling. So I had to come up with a way. And I'd like to say that I feel like I was maybe a little ahead of the curve, because now transparency and radical candor and all that stuff is all the rage. Well, for me, my leader tip is I'm huge on figuring out a way to use the things I'm good at to not have to do the things I don't like doing. So it's really not a complicated tip. This whole work on your weaknesses thing, no. Not me. I'm like, how can I make the things I'm good at just make the other stuff easier? And so for me, I was good at building relationships. That's what I was good at. People liked me. People were good with me. So I realized that if I could leverage that skill of building relationships, that put me in a position to be able to be more transparent. If I could use that relationship to leverage what I needed to get from people, I had more of a chance to actually get it. So the shift, though, was that I had to realize that just babying people, hand-holding people, wasn't actually caring. It wasn't caring to let people fail every day. It wasn't caring to let somebody not be successful. It wasn't caring to be dishonest with somebody and not give them real feedback. So the shift for me was, how do I put myself in a position to feel really confident giving that feedback and being completely honest and transparent? Well, I realized I did that really well with people who I cared about. So I worked really hard to build those relationships so I could leverage that to take care of people. And so I cared, just like I always had, it just looked differently. And to this day, almost every single person who's worked for me and doesn't work for me anymore will still say, like, my goal is that they leave just as positively as they started. And I would probably not be able to name a single person who left working for me who doesn't still consider me a friend or one of their top leaders. Because people leave just as strongly with me as they did coming in. And that's something that's really important to me. And so that was how I started to use that transparency to leverage to get what I wanted. And so I really do think we've just got to take a look at where's my clicker? What does transparency look like, and how do we do that? Well, we create more transparency and are able to have better conversations when we actually have the right conversations to start with. When we have clear expectations with people and clear goal setting with people and clear markers for success, when people know where the bullseye is, we can't help people if we're not clear with how they actually win. We can't be supportive with people if they don't know the path. Just like we talked about right at the beginning, if we don't know the road, if we don't know the roadmap, if our people don't know the roadmap, how do we help them get there? And so again, one of the tools was, well, let's just make sure people are really clear on what I expect from them. Again, not naturally wanting to have negative conversations. That's not where I like to sit. Goal, don't have to have them. Make sure things are clear. We avoid having those conversations more often than not. Crazy leader tip, do the things that work for you, not the things you don't like to do. So that was my thing. So this is where we get to the next phase. I feel like I missed something. Maybe I didn't. No, I did. So what I want you to do, miss your activity. What I want you to do is super quick at your table, because this all comes down to building relationships. Again, brilliance in this room. I want you to think about, how do you build a relationship with someone at work who you don't know? What's that? What do you do? Let's learn from each other. How do you build relationships and how do you build trust at work? What's cool about this room is we've got lots of different environments. Right? It's very different with how you build relationships potentially in a banking world than it is in a fitness world, right? I was on a panel yesterday with somebody from StarTech, and she said, oh, we don't have a lot of conflict at work. And I went, oh, we do. And it was like this, it was a panel in front of students, and she was like, yeah, that doesn't happen very often. And I was like, oh, like daily? I'm like every day? So every environment is different. I explained, I'm like, you know what, when you're in a fun culture, bad stuff happens, right? Fun cultures are not always fun. They get a little too fun. So they lead to lots of conversations. So I want to take 5 minutes, best practices for building relationships and building trust, okay? I might cut it off shorter than 5, probably 3. So when we think about follow through, we've got to recognize what are the things that stand in the way of follow through. And the things that stand in the way of follow through typically are time. We're too busy. That's why we energize, prioritize, and optimize. Discomfort, where we're actually just uncomfortable with the whole concept. It might be outside of our natural place, right? But if we don't follow through on all the things, if we build this relationship and set these boundaries, for lack of a better word, and then we don't follow through, that's our integrity, right? When our actions don't match our words, that's when we're in trouble. So the only person who can actually execute on this and make this happen is you. You are 100% responsible for the follow through piece, right? This is where we've got to own it and recognize where are our challenges? What are the times when we don't follow through? Why is this hard? What are we avoiding? Okay? So I have one last activity I want you to do, and it is a bit of a map. So the question in the middle, if you can't see it, is what follow through conversation am I avoiding? Why am I avoiding it? What do I need to change to prevent it from happening again? What do I need to impact in order to move forward? And what will I feel when I move past this? Okay, so just for yourself, you're just going to map this out super quick. So what follow-through conversation are you avoiding? And then the other questions. Just to wrap this up, guys, the one thing that I always like to mention whenever we're working on something is it's not going to be perfect. We talked earlier about the fact that things ebb and flow and everything else. The biggest thing is we just need to be humble enough to know that we're going to make mistakes and be okay with it, right? We're going to screw up. What I would hope for is that if we can move to the point where we can identify where we are on the spectrum and go, this is where I'm sitting right now, like, you know, I'm being a little passive aggressive right now. If we can get to the point that when we're dealing with communication challenges, identifying what we're doing and taking our own ownership on where we're sitting. Are we sitting in silence? Are we sitting in an aggressive state? Where are we? If we can start to reflect on that, that's going to put us in the best position to lead. If we can start to identify our role in broken communication, it's going to help us move forward. Okay? Good? So, that was our, no one is perfect. That's why pencils have erasers. So, I'm finishing off. Isn't she cute? So, for anybody who follows me on social media, I've been dropping hints all along that something exciting is coming. So you guys are the first ones who get to know, and you potentially already know because we've handed out flyers. But you guys are the official group that I'm launching my first online learning series. So, thank you. That's really not necessary. But energize, prioritize, and optimize for success. I've talked, if you've come to any of the lunch and learns, I've kind of put pieces out there about energy blocking and about maximizing our energy systems and about essentially how do we control the chaos in our lives and do the things we want to do so we can lead more fulfilled lives. So I am launching it here today. We are selling it at half price. If there is an interest, it is at the booth. Regardless, it will be available all the time, but the flyers are on the table explaining it, and the girls at the table have an entire list. It's about 5 hours of content, but I am super excited that it's finally here and that we made this happen. Next will be the Build Relationships one, same thing. So we're going to build the entire Happy Leader method into an online learning course. So very exciting. That's where we're going.